just to remind us of some of the change that has occurred in the last 10 years or more. Our Member of Parliament for this region was Cecil Parkinson. He was a very important man because he was the favourite of Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of England. Anyway, I went to visit him with Marcus Hayward, and we talked about something relevant, and Cecil turned to me very superiorly and said, "I don't have to meditate on my navel to know the answer to that one." A dig at me, who dared to talk about meditation and politics. Well, I did. And that was an event that shows you how we have changed, because today's science is very keen on meditation, because although the great businesses of England and Europe had shown that meditational therapy made or refreshed their employees so that they were given time off every week to practice meditation, the government had not heard. But of course now there are many schools that prescribe meditation as one of the learning lessons that kids need to have in order to counter the fact that English kids are the naughtiest in Europe, or if you like, to put it more succinctly, the most delinquent in Europe. And so we're coming to a subject today that science has at last been forced to give its attention to, not because we have loved meditation and daydreaming and the arts and all those lovely things which we can enjoy on our own privately sometimes. No, science is looking at this extraordinary subject of meditation and its effect of refreshing the brain, so that I could, 30 years ago, sit down to meditate. In fact, I was teaching in a London school, and in the lunch hour, having an office to myself, I was able to stretch out in the lunch hour, the school lunch hour, and have 20 minutes in which I could daydream, relax, meditate, and lo and behold, I noticed, going to the toilet before starting teaching again, my face was flushed red, and that was because the blood flow to the head had increased through the act of meditating, even of daydreaming. So there was no need for me to prove to myself that meditation, even if it's on the navel in the practices of some politicians, that it is an important factor in everyday life. What I'm going to talk to you about today is more of the mechanics of this process of self-energization, which Plato practiced. Some call it self-examination, where we can lie down quietly in the middle of the day and we can examine ourselves and our capacity to deal with the forthcoming events of the day, a process of self-examination. For instance, I'm going to meet the bank manager. He's not going to give me anything, but I can try. And what you say to the bank manager, and how you deal with your next-door neighbour, and so on and so on. A process of self-examination, very important, often a prerequisite to the meditational process exactly or directly. I am drawing my guidance for today on the article in the March issue of Scientific America, March 2010, an article roughed out by a man called Marcus, God knows, fine old English name, Reichli. No, I can't pronounce it, but there you are. I would advise you, if you can at any time pick up this issue of Scientific American, you will get hold of it. March 2010. because it lays out a concession by science. And the concession is that indeed all these mystical practices and nonsense experiences, negative experiences, they now call them defaults of the brain, that all these experiences have some value. After all, after telling us that the electroencephalogram was registering the major input of energy into the human brain, which was nonsense, they have discovered that these mystical practices, like meditation, are valuable indeed. They refresh employees of big business, and they affect school children, and they do all sorts of things to these poets and artists and other disreputable beings that muck up science. Yes, I'm talking about our day, and the man that has just attacked all the religions, all together, scientists. Now he's being himself attacked. Isn't that awful? Not to us, it ain't. And so we are to look at this extraordinary subject. In detail, no, I'm going to spare you the detail. I'm going to tell you what you need to know from this article. The article starts off by talking about a perfectly ordinary thing that can happen. You may decide that you would sit down in a hot afternoon like we've got at the moment, and you would relax and perhaps doze a little bit. And while you dozed a little bit, the records, including the encephalogram, showed that there was a row going on inside of you. Not that you could hear, but it was one that was recorded by this marvelous machine they had invented. There was a constant row going on, even though you were relaxed. But if while you were relaxed and dozing, a fly settled on your arm, and you came to attention and you chased it away. And immediately then they thought, well, the brain had sprung into action, and now it was churning out energy in order to activate the muscles through the brain and get rid of the fly. Squash it! And so that sort of thing was the basis of human scientific understanding of the activation of a human being. It was wrong. What they found was, when they followed this through, what Alice Bailey had called active intelligence, like swatting the fly and turning the heater on or off or whatever, that active intelligence was only a minimal part of the expenditure of energy by the brain. There was a maximum part. In fact, 20 times as much energy was spent by the brain and its neurons, its nerves. 20 times as much energy was spent in the daydreaming, in the relaxation. The brain was flooding with energy. And they were able to measure it at last, and they began to understand that the electroencephalogram had been recording these gigantic energies as being part of active intelligence, like swatting the fly and reading and jumping around and squash and tennis and soccer and all these different things. They were using it. No, they weren't using the energy. It was the sedentary things that... It's in black and white. There's the article. March. And I'm trying to water it down so that you can read it and understand it. So I'm going to read 3 lines from it. But recent analysis produced by neuroimaging technology has revealed something quite remarkable. A revolution for science has revealed something quite remarkable. A great deal of meaningful activity is occurring in the brain when a person is sitting back and doing nothing at all. Or, as they would say, later daydreaming, meditating, pondering, brooding, what we call in the esoteric the meditative way of living. Why not take that down and put it in your spiritual diaries? MWOL, the meditative way of life, if you like to call it that. Yes, and we live by it here. No matter how hard we work, we have always known that we can drop out at any time. So what does science say about this period in which we drop out, in which you and I give the deepest of our thoughts and brain activities to an understanding of something more superficial than birds and booze and the everyday, ordinary things of life? So science first described this as a default of the brain. Yes, a default of the brain, if you please. But they add to this, and they call it the brain's default mode of networking. Nice, obscure hiding of the true facts from the lay public, who have been involved in the production of art and poetry and so on, through hundreds of years. But then along comes Baker, who happens to be a life member of the Theosophical Society. They gave me a life membership. Do you know why? Well, perhaps some of you better forget it. They gave me a life membership of the Theosophical Society because they had chucked me out previously. They had chucked me out, and they chucked me out because they thought I was a dangerous threat to the society, that I would want to take it over and impose my awful ideas. Well, one of those ideas has stuck and has taught science a lesson, and I want Theosophy to get the credit for it. They had that opportunity to get that credit, as Ted Capstick, my friend here, knows, and somehow forgot it, that the source of true energy in the brain was from the mental body. And part of my discovery that this was true, and we could prove it, was that when I was a little boy, I suppose about 8 or 9, getting very precocious, when I was a little boy, I had this book to read, and it was by Sir James Jeans. And Sir James Jeans was the leading astronomer of the day. Everyone approved of him. And somewhere in Sir James Jeans' book, and I can't find it now, but somebody will find it in the British Museum, was a remark of his that maybe that this universe, this tremendously active thing, maybe it's just part of a thought form, the thought form of some gigantic being slowly materializing itself. That hit me. Even at that age, I was able to understand that there's a possibility of this, and that Aristotle may have been right in implying that all things live, and Baker might even be right in saying the universe is a living thing. How can I have a God if I know that the universe is a living thing, when St. Paul has said, in him we live and move and have our being? Must I oppose that when I have such eminent gentlemen showing to me that I am perhaps right in saying that the universe is a living thing? Imagine what that implies, that you and I, or the group of Theosophists, or whoever is here, are saying something or doing something that is damned irritating to the speak, or perhaps it's therapy for this being in whom we live and move and have our nature, and whom the yogis say to us, go with the stream, try and assist the one in whom you, as a Christian, in whom you live and move and have your being. So I tried all my life to cooperate with some of these extraordinary ideas that were coming to me, not through the, gave the wrong word, not through the stuff that was being taught me at school, and high school and prep, but I was listening to other things, to something that seemed to be part of me and in me. And it was this brain's default mode network. Science has just called it. No, I was lucky, and I set up later a college, of which this is part, to help people like that who were receiving extraordinary impulses, if you like, from within that seemed to be so contradictory to what I was being taught at school and at university. 4 of the damn things, 4 universities. And there are many things that I pay tribute to my university. They were all women professors then when I came out of the army, because the other men were either imprisoned in German and Japanese war camps, and there was nobody left at the universities to teach the important subjects except women professors, and they were damn good at it. Anyway, we must stick to the subject. It is important because the subject of, we won't give it the scientific name, default. We'll talk about a nicer name that is emerging as more and more scientists begin to read about it and learn about the brain. It is an intrinsic part of the brain. You know what intrinsic means. A ring maybe have no value to you, except it has an intrinsic value to you because your mother once wore it or your father once wore it, and it has intrinsic value. Now they are beginning to call this subject the hidden areas of the brain, as we used to say. We didn't know what to call it. Science gave us no lead at all. So we called it the silent areas of the brain. Seemed to work in some people, like you and me, the silent areas of the brain. And when we thought that some of it was as wrong as science believed it to be, we said, well, all right, let's call it the spare room of the mind, that you may enter the spare room of the mind at any time and, according to your experience, develop a love of the arts and of what Plato taught, that there is truth, beauty, and goodness in the world, and that we can live by this code. Now science is beginning to find, because this naughty brain of ours that governs the 5 gateways to consciousness, this naughty brain of ours, they have discovered, is mainly the interpreter of waves. And the waves are coming from very, very small microparticles. And so these microparticles are interpreting extraordinary patterns of waves, which we have somehow linked to the Delaware Laboratory's extraordinary discoveries in the 1950s, 1960s. But also these waves seem to be giving people more use and experience of consciousness than science could offer them through these 5 gateways of the senses and nothing else. And so there has emerged, as you have heard me say, the physics, classical physics, and quantum physics. Now we know, thanks to orthodox science, that classical physics is okay. It is a physics based on what we receive through our 5 senses, and then there's quantum physics that we receive through the brain, but is invisible and can't be measured. In fact, some people mess the experiment up if it's done again and again. So we're making progress, but very, very slowly, and standing in our way is science. If that damned electroencephalogram had not been credited with so many wonderful things in 1930, maybe today we would be using much of this energy that science has just discovered for more creative things. that the humble classes might have been easier educated and less of an expensive burden on the state as the, how much is it, 40, 50 billion a year for education on things that have nothing to do with the main energy source of the brain. Dear, oh dear, what a mess we have got ourselves into. Today I'm going to introduce the subject to you by comparing the brain to an orchestra. And you'll see why later on. Comparing the brain to an orchestra. All right, in the orchestra you have musicians. Here are the musicians. Here is the brain. The surface of the brain. You've all got one, I hope. And there are parts of the brain that we can identify. This part of the brain is the part of the brain that interprets vision. And in a musical orchestra, we could say there are a group of violinists. Does that analogy work with you? That this could be a group of musicians playing in an orchestra, and one group is violinists, another group is drummers. Here is the muscular activation of the brain. Here is the personality activation. Here is language, and so on. So we have got in ourselves a group, much like an orchestra, that can do different things. And in the orchestra you have these musicians, and the most important part of the brain and the orchestra is the conductor, the orchestra leader. And depending on the orchestra leader is often the quality of the orchestra. Isn't it true? Yes. Sir Thomas Beecham, does anybody remember that name? Yes. Sir Benjamin Britten? Yes. It was the quality of the orchestra leader who was somehow able to bring out the violinist's virtues and bring out the drummers at the right moment, not too soon, not too late, and bring out the different. Yes. So the analogy that I'm giving is taken from Scientific American, exactly that analogy, and the analogy says that the leader of the orchestra is the silent areas of the brain, the spare rooms of the mind, this extraordinary entity that through a stick, and I used a stick deliberately, and it was always the yardstick in order to make my own analogy more emphatic, that this entity, the meditational part, the daydreaming part, the brooding, the thinking of abstract thought. Yes, Theosophy has taught it for 100 years or more, that there is a whole plane of abstract thinking, and it energizes. But where does the abstract plane thought get its energy from? The stars. What? Are you trying to tell me that somehow the stars contribute to the motivation of the human brain? Oh, I see a lot of my friends beginning to reverse their ideas. Yes, and this group of stars that are doing it is our Milky Way. It's our Milky Way, which has huge clusters of dark energy embedded in it. And we can see the photograph of it, the picture of it, later on, sometime in the seminar. And so it is that kind of region of the orchestra and of the brain that is giving 90% of its energy, giving it 90% of its energy, and it's only 10%. Don't disbelieve me. Go and disbelieve Scientific American. I've said it for 15 years or more. Simple. There, we have a mental aura, a mental body living in a mental plane, and you can see books, dozens of books, describing the mental plane, describing the mental aura of the human being. And they've been there, read and digested for 100 years or more. But nobody has had the bottle to come out and face the scientific world and say, your electroencephalograph is wrong. It is the meditative way of life that is refreshing people and drawing energy into the body. And I say compare the orchestra leader as being similar to the requirements of an esoteric group leader. There is something that you have to have as an esoteric group leader, even if it will only draw a sparse attendance. You have to have some kind of human, loving wisdom link with a person. So that they say, even if he shouts at me, even if he says naughty things, I can still link with him because he loves me and he will energize me and I can turn to him, and so on and so on. And we learn from this. I'm pointing no fingers. I'm just telling you how it has been for this last 50 years or so for me. And so here we have then the definite evidence coming forward scientifically, as Scientific American describes it, of a new way of looking at things. Excuse me while I rearrange my papers. Questions. I'll take a few questions. If you've something that is irritating you, have a go. Question me. I don't mind. Right, let's go on then. 5 pages of it, straight out of Scientific American, what I'm telling you. The most scientifically oriented scientists, the most sensitive, who, being scientists, respect the 5 gateways that ordinary or classical physics is based on, but are so sensitive that they know there's something else. There's something wrong with the encephalogram. It's showing energy and maybe it's just noise that it's recorded, but there is something pouring energy into the brain. And they were right. They were the sensitive scientists who stood out and looked at dark energy. I've been pushing this subject, dark energy, for years and years. And that is exactly what the energy was that comes into the minds of people who are MWOL, practicing the meditative way of life. That's the only way I can explain it. Nothing has emerged giving it more specificity. And so this is what I'm trying to talk about. And we must go on with it. Some of these scientists estimate that these guys, the violinists, the different musicians in the orchestra, they may make the sound of everyday living, picking up a carton of milk at the chemist or wherever you get it from, and so on. But it is the silent group, the meditators, are getting not 5% of the energy. Here it is. 5% of the energy coming into the brain goes into everyday activities. And the other 90-odd, no, I'm not going to claim the lot. The other energy pouring into the brain, 90% say, there it is. Science itself says this, of a yardstick or a meter stick. 96% of the material, the energetic mass of the universe is unknown. We don't know what it is. What we do know is gas, liquid, solid particles that we have long since worshipped under classical physics, and I'm covering with my hand here. That was what the scientists were basing their opinions on, judging the consciousness of the planet, of humanity, and so on. That 4 or 5%, where the rest of it was unknown. Even at the beginning of this year, it was still being taught. instead of which the 95% is dark energy. And Baker has pointed out that Theosophists have been talking about dark energy as mental energy, mental matter, tiny particles invisible to microscopes. Why? Because perhaps they're in a different dimension. And Theosophy says that, of course. What do you mean, a different dimension of the mind? Well, if you have ever experienced it, abstract thinking is on a different plane, and Theosophy says so. And the fact that we have got 5,000 abstract thinkers, scientists, not religionists, and we the Theosophists say there's no religion higher than truth. We know that this mental energy slowly converting to other states in thought forms, that this mental energy represents the main substance of the universe, and it is the conversion of that mental energy within the Milky Way, as we have seen as an example, that is creating or causing expansion of the universe, or at least our part of it. Because when we here on the planet brood and think and ponder, we are creating some sort of suction. 7 billion of us now are thinking, are meditating, are daydreaming, are brooding, and we are creating a suction that is so drawing dark energy from the Milky Way and associated galaxies, and some little galaxies are more donative of this than others, like Sagittarius. In fact, if you want to start drawing analogies to something like the Milky Way, it would be very appropriate to say that of all the celestial bodies, the Milky Way, as science sees at the moment, could be an egg that is in the process of transmogrifying, of changing into a living thing, which makes Humpty Dumpty very important as a symbol. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And even suggest that sometimes they themselves, the scientists, think that perhaps the egg has fallen and it has broken and cracked and can't be put together again. And yet there are others that say that the egg is growing, it's fertile, and it is producing changes which indicate that it is a living thing. And it will change from an egg contents through an embryo into a living thing, and will be, as it were, by analogy, reborn one day. And all this has perhaps missed some of you. You were stewing somewhere, calling it your life, calling it your career, calling it your purpose. And so some of us have had to, I'm not going to say resurrect because it's a dirty word to me, but some of us are beginning to feel that perhaps we should restore the ancient confidence that there is a purpose, and the purpose is related to something growing within us that grows all the time, even between lives, that is, what shall we call it? A soul. A soul is growing, and there have been psychologists, transcendental psychologists like Maslow, who have talked about something remains after death and remains growing and integrating the life experiences, one after the other, into itself. Some say that it forms a kind of lotus. We've had a lotus shown us here by, how would you call your profession? What's your name? I've lost his name even. Yes, the lotus is the closest expression we have to what is the soul, and which is growing between lives and goes on, because some of us, like me, know that we are immortal if not in a physical body, but at least in consciousness. And I have that certainty. I came out of the war half dead. They said you won't live till much longer than 55. As you know, I'm 90, knocking on 90. And I'm knocking on 90 because I've associated such a transcendental being that continues to exist, dead or alive. It continues to exist, growing, growing, growing in consciousness. And I talk about not so much about gods and celestial beings, but beings higher than man. I know one, a being higher than man, and I know what planet he is related to and can return to when his task here on this planet has ended for the time being. And there are such beings that help to guard this planet because in some unaccountable way the population of this planet reduced to 10,000 a few thousand years ago. This planet has somehow transformed itself from an entity red in tooth and claw into a place that is not just livable, but it is becoming possible that this planet can sustain higher beings on it, one of whom, very close to us, esoteric beings, is Julius Caesar. And his beginnings started even before 55 BC. Was that when Julius Caesar crossed the Channel and took his centurions into England after defeating the Celts in France? What a wonderful future those who have esoteric understandings can enjoy if they would only allow themselves to broaden their consciousness. And so many have had difficulties, not only in doing it, but surviving it. So we're back to our analogy again now. Yes, the orchestra can be compared to the parts of the brain that express certain activities, but they are only the outer part of the brain's expression. There is a deeper part, and if all these parts of the orchestra can be lifted and their waves entangled together as a unit, which is the orchestra itself, they will begin to express quantum energies such as non-location, and they will soon become, through that extraordinary link, entangled with perhaps even the composer, but certainly with the orchestra leader. And the orchestra leader plays the role in the orchestra of someone who has that kind of life, MWOL, meditative way of life, has the strength and potency of a Benjamin Britten and it's a Thomas Beecham, and one coming up very soon that has expressed the ability through his music, through his orchestra, and through his conducting to win an enemy of mankind like North Korea. Yes, New York Philharmonic Orchestra took an orchestra to North Korea and played for them. Yes, there he is. You can read it for yourselves. Somebody read it. Who remembers this broadcast on BBC? A whole night's program when this man took his orchestra into North Korea that wouldn't talk to anyone. But he took his orchestra in there and it was a gigantic success. And he played music. The conductor, Lauren Mansell, led a historic concert February the 26th in Pyongyang as the New York Philharmonic became the first major American orchestra to perform in the insulated communist country, North Korea. So the officials say, and broadcast the concert nationwide and internationally, and I watched it on BBC, and there he is with his stick. So the power, and we all often say to ourselves, well, what the hell has an orchestra leader got that we haven't got? But he can hold together 30 or 40. Can I have a picture of the orchestra? So now this man Baker is comparing the orchestra, there it is, to the brain's parts. Myriads of consciousness, coordinated, held together by an orchestra leader, which is the MWOL cells of the brain holding this together. Because that's exactly what science is describing. That these latent cells that you and I have because of our interest in meditation and so on, have some sort of waves that we give off that hold together and inform these different parts of the brain. Vision, muscular activity, personality ability. But that's an analogy between the human brain and its multitudinous activities, which at a subjective, esoteric level, it's been esoteric until now, at an esoteric level, this silent part of the brain that nobody knew anything about except us had underground, hidden ability to feed ancient memories of yours into your everyday life so that you are careful in the way you express yourself, in the way you move your muscles, in the way you see things, remembering that the eye cells and vision cells at the back of the brain are things which are very poorly supplied with opportunities to express themselves. We think we have good vision. No, perhaps 1/10 of its possibilities, and C.W. Leadbeater knew that. I'm not going to go into that now. So here is your brain, and here is the 90% of brain energies is passing through this man here, and he has the opportunity, and should have the opportunity, to ponder on his presentation of a concert. How shall I present this script written by some guy? How am I going to present this aspect of his feeling of the composer? Well, that's his job. He uses a little baton to point out the particular fragments of the orchestra as we today point out the different fragments of the brain. And somehow or the other, he is able to reach them, and they will do it for him, if nobody else. And we have the same sort of analogous function in which we can reach people in a group so that you can move mountains through a group membership just by tugging on something, an ancient memory, how you have helped that person in the group. Now you're calling on him to express something very difficult for the group, and he will do it. If not for you, he's doing it for the group, which is what you want. So the analogy works. Never take analogies too far. But the analogy works. And you understand more now about the way in which this meditative way of life and the energy it attracts into you can be applied. Because the most profound application of it is when a group thinks collectively. Write it down in your diaries, that when the group thinks collectively, meditates collectively, exercises its missions collectively, that is 20 times more powerful because it has 20 times as much energy to express. And it's all there. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Thank you. So we are moving. Now I have, of course, got to talk about these gateways that we have been releasing our capacities through. The gateways. It is being shown that although some of us have brilliant eyesight, that the retina gives off much, much, much more information than it is capable for the cells in the occipital lobe at the back of the head are able to express. The vision cells in the occipital cortex are unable to express the masses of detail. It gives the figures here in billions and so on, pouring into our consciousness, and vision, for all its wondrous things like color and so on, is still only able to present our consciousness with enough visual experience to give perhaps a 50th of the information that is there coming from the retina. What does that suggest? It suggests we have more potential, and if we can't express it through the five senses, shut them down. Just shut them down for a little while and allow the meditative way of life to bring through meditation and other esoteric disciplines, always remembering that discrimination is the important key when you are bringing so much energy through from the meditative way of life. Discrimination of the real from the unreal. How are we to proceed on the path? You get a ridiculous answer comes through, you think, I know what the answer is. If you will serve humanity in everything you do and not your personal self, you will find extraordinary things happen. One of the extraordinary things that happens is your money goes further and your money increases, so long as you are using it effectively to express something collectively with the rest of humanity. Poverty, of course. That was what the role of the Catholic Church was. Poverty, instead of which they burnt people alive in the streets. Everyone is praising South Africa, little understanding that, of course, the mob in South Africa rules. And if you try to defend the white rule that was, you'll be called a racist, like me. No, I don't like where my sister of 93 lives, for her to be in a country in which the Zulus, a savage race by their own admission, are able to take hold of somebody they want to punish and just put a tire over him, just an empty tire from a car. Cover him up with tires. He's inside a pile of tires. Then pour some petrol over the lot and set it alight. Yes, that is the current method at the moment of mob rule. No, I don't talk about it. I know it's there, and I know that it's going to be directed against a certain element of the population, which was directed against 200 years earlier in a place called Wienen and in a place called Pietermaritzburg, where hundreds and hundreds of white farmers and their wives and children were killed, murdered, because there's a natural antipathy between the Afrikaans race and the Stone Age Zulus. We could go on talking forever. It's no good saying, I don't like that, I'm not going to have anything to do with it. Who will? It's you who are responsible for this humanity of our planet. Who else? Can you name a politician that will stand doing the same sort of work? Not now, you can't. You've got a lot of thinking to do because you have to change. And so I'm going to ask you now for a 5-minute break, please. Are there any questions before we do it? Anything that's worrying you? Because I've got you really cornered at the moment. I've got Scientific American's article here. Yes, lady. Sorry? Anatomically?
Yes, brain could not.
It can't.
Because?
Well, of course, environmental factors are important. What you eat, whether your daddy smokes a lot or not, and all sorts of things. If you ascend into a higher plane, subplane, as all of us tend to do if we tread the path, you begin to see elements of the realities of that plane. I am in a plane, reached a plane, thank you for the question. I have reached a plane which provides, as I research mental energy and observe how it grows into thought forms, is it any wonder that I am finding that if I direct any of my visual energies from the eyes around me, I can see everything trying to form human-like structures, because the very thing that we learn first of all as we grow up as babies into manhood is that we, and the monkeys prove it, we look. If a monkey sees you, the first thing he does is to try and recognize friend or foe. And we do that, and have always done it because our brains are attuned to it. And when we reach into a higher plane, we begin to see forms. Things take forms. The palm there, for instance, and it's maybe a human form that has got a very red face and hair all over the place. Not because I'm cuckoo, but because I'm in a higher plane and I'm taking into that higher plane the ability of my equipment to see everything in terms of a human being. Yes, and if you go into a room in which there is a mass of something or the other, the brain, when you go into the higher planes, the mental planes, when you go into the higher planes, you begin to see everything around you in terms of human form, naturally. It's the oldest thing you start with. As a baby, you learn to recognize your mother. And Mum is the only one that you want to begin with. And then Papa. And then perhaps a friendly little brother. And that we tend to see human things. And when we're going into higher states, and we have these energies representing themselves in various forms, we tend, and we must be prepared for it. And we must understand that this kind of thing will happen, and it will happen to you. And I'm telling you now because some of you will enjoy entering higher mental subplanes, and the first thing that you begin to notice that everything in your environment, instead of being furniture, curtains, doors, and so on, you are now in a new environment, a new subplane, and you start to see things in people around you. You don't accept them as being people because it's not true, but you know that that is a phenomenon that may occur, and it has perhaps occurred with you. But for goodness sake, if you take fright at that, and you go and get a pill from the doctor to chase it away, you're never going to get anywhere. My friend Scott here knows how it is important for some people who are suitably integrated, we call it psychosynthesis, to be able to investigate experimentally all kinds of phenomena that produce super-conscious experience, even those which are maybe purely the visual part of the brain. Did somebody ask a question, or may I just grab the... You did, all right. Are you the little girl with troubles? No. I just wondered why you seated yourself forward. Where's Valerie? Perhaps she has... Oh, there you're hiding at the back of the room. This little girl has had a condition known as MS, and very bravely she has been helped by Ted to attend a seminar even out here, though she was able to get to the TS in Gloucester Place in London. She has braved it all and come out here, and you're welcome, dear. And I hope you are coping. So will you all go and have a break now, walk around and come back